Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a huge pleasure, may I say, to be able as a backbencher to join Friday Business and to support this really important bill on behalf of my Mid Norfolk constituency. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady, the member for Sunderland Central, on bringing this bill, on winning, first of all, that first prized first place in the ballot and being able to really make a difference with this bill, and thank the government for working with her and all of us who've supported her in support of it. This is a good example of cross-party work, government working with backbenchers in the interests of our constituents and the shared and mutual interests of the citizens of this country. And I only wish more people around the country were able to see the quality of this work going on in this House on days like this. I wanted, Madam Deputy Speaker, to particularly highlight the importance of this bill for rural areas like mine. I know the Honourable Lady represents a magnificently urban constituency in Sunderland Central. I, Madam Deputy Speaker, represent a magnificently rural constituency in Mid Norfolk. 114 villages, 5 towns, the border, the boundary which I cycled as a candidate, rather rashly promising to cycle it one Saturday morning. I then discovered was 94 miles long and took me rather more than one Saturday morning. And much of this country is indeed rural and up north as well as down south and in the southwest. And I want to particularly focus on the importance of this bill and building societies in rural areas and on the high streets of our towns, in providing cash facilities, supporting first-time buyers and pensioners with cash. And I'm particularly reference in Dereham, where recently I saw nationwide packed queues outside with people, pensioners, moving from the bank, which is closing, to support Nationwide as Nationwide supports them. And in a constituency in a part of the country where we have a huge number of retired folk who actually do want cash, they don't all want to be totally digital. They value and need that interaction of a person, a living and breathing human being, when they go to save or when they go to take out cash, and Nationwide Building Society doing great work in supporting them. And I'm really keen to support this bill, as the Honourable Lady knows, largely because of that particular rural need. I want to touch on... Yes, I'd be delighted to give way to my right honourable friend.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. I should declare I'm a member, I think, of 3 building societies, and until recently had a mortgage with a Nationwide Building Society. I agree with my honourable friend about the importance of building societies in rural communities. I think of very local ones, Suffolk Building Society, but elsewhere around the country there are places like Newbury Building Society and similar, and it's that connection to the community that really matters. But can I say to my honourable friend, what really is important is to get on with this primary legislation, but to get the negative secondary regulations through as quickly as possible so that we can boost mortgage borrowing for families who are very keen to get onto the housing market.
Yes, I completely agree. My right honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I know we'll come to that in due course. She's absolutely right. I want to focus particularly on this issue of building societies in rural areas, on the flight of the banks from particularly rural areas, but actually a lot of high street banking and the role that they've traditionally carried out, which is partly why this bill is so important. Highlight the importance of cash in the rural economy. Many of my local small businesses really struggling with how to bank cash properly, and we've also got a problem in our part of the world of ATMs now being subject to JCB thefts, ATMs being ripped out of the wall. So there's a cash problem, and I think the building societies have a really important role there. And I wanted also to highlight that as well as this reflecting the very best of old Labour, it's also, if I may say, the very best of civic conservatism. This is Edward Burke's Little Platoons. This is the weft and the warp of local, connected, responsible, civic, community-based capitalism. The sort of capitalism that small platoon civic conservatism has long championed, but I would argue all parties in government for the last 40 years have slightly forgotten that it needs championing, and we've seen a rise and a domination of big capital, big banks, big disconnected capitalism. So I'm here today as a card-carrying supporter of the mutuality model and of civic capitalism, which I think both main parties actually have in common in different traditions in their history. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me just turn to this issue of rural banking and rural finance. As I said, in Mid Norfolk we have 5 towns, 114 villages. We are not quite halfway between Cambridge and Norwich. It's an area which has traditionally been something of a rural backwater, an agricultural community, many retirees, many pensioners moving to quiet rural Norfolk, and a real challenge of how we make sure that our villages remain vibrant, our towns remain thriving, in a model of development in the last 40 years, which has been rather over-focused on commuter housing, cars, people driving to Norwich and Cambridge, and sucking the life out of, during the day, many of our villages, and indeed the rise of online commerce, the rise of digital retail, actually taking quite a lot of the life out of many of our towns, and our high streets are really struggling to remain vibrant. Now, the government's moves on reduction of business rates has helped, but the pandemic and the cost of energy crisis coming off the back of the Ukraine war has really hit rural areas disproportionately hard, and it's a theme I'll be picking up in the coming months in this House in the run-up to the budget. Everyone's been hit by the cost of energy increase, of course, but in rural areas you get a double, triple whammy. Every member of staff in your company has to drive. Most of my relatively low-paid working families have got 1 or 2 or 3 cars, not as a luxury. They're not. They do it because they have to have that in order to get to work. All of our public services are hit. Our bus services are hit. Our county councils hit. All across rural areas, we're paying a double whammy because of the over-dependency on transport, on heating. So there's a huge rural impact, and that is hitting rural areas, particularly in my part of Norfolk, in those sort of backwater remote areas, very hard. And it's in that context that it is really urgent that we encourage the revival of the rural economy. And I've long believed and campaigned locally that with a slightly different approach to planning and development in our area, we could actually trigger something of a rural renaissance, with many small businesses popping up off the backs of the Cambridge phenomenon, the Norwich Research Park. Small businesses often working from home, starting from home, or looking for converted farm units. Small businesses that are not in the city centre, they're distributed. And if we can get more businesses back in villages and back in small towns, we'll get more people of working age in those communities during the day. We reduce congestion, we reduce commuting. And that model of a vibrant rural economy is completely key to so many of the priorities of successive governments. We'll never get to net zero if we keep shoveling people into cars and making them to commute long distance in congested traffic jams. The more we can get people to work from home, work nearer from home, and travel when they need to during the day, not in peak hours. So this vision of rural renaissance, I think, is completely key. But it'll never happen if we're not able to have young people able to afford to buy a house in and near where they work, if we're not able to have thriving businesses on the high streets that are able to cash up, save and deposit cash safely, if we're not able to have pensioners who are able to save and able to go and actually take out their deposits and interact with banking in the way that for 50, 60 years they used to. We need to make sure that we're building an economy that works for the people who actually live there. And that's what my campaign, The Norfolk Way, is all about. It's a project to promote that vision of rural growth. So I think this bill touches on much of that, and one only has to see, and I know colleagues in other constituencies see this, you only have to see the flight of the mainstream banks out of areas like this, the desperation of people, whether first-time buyers or pensioners, for that. I'll happily give way to Marlon.
I think he's making an excellent speech, but in my constituency, we shouldn't see building societies as some panacea. They are closing branches in my area as well. And I just wonder, as part of this, how do we encourage building societies to keep those branches open, which are closing throughout the country?
No, my honourable friend is right. He makes an excellent point, and I don't want to suggest they are the total panacea. I'm lauding and applauding Nationwide in Durham because they're doing great work, but we need to make sure this bill is part of a broader approach, I think, and I hope Treasury Ministers thinking about the run-up to the budget and looking ahead will think about how we can encourage more choice, competition and more presence of both building societies and indeed banks. We need choice and we need competition in rural areas, in areas that are not well served as well as in those that are. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in this area, this opportunity of rural renaissance has been really hit hard by the pandemic, really hit hard by the Ukraine war impact on energy prices and Putin turning off the gas taps and the cost of living crisis that we've all experienced. And it is in that context, I think, that this bill represents a chink of light and has been hugely supported locally, and I'm delighted to have helped the Honourable Lady to bring it here to this House. I want to say something, if I may, about the banks, because over the 13 years I've been privileged to be the Member of Parliament for Mid Norfolk, the gradual closure of banks in rural Norfolk, a cause that I remember fondly back in 2009, working with the former Prime Minister and member for South West Norfolk on, back in the day, before she became Prime Minister, is something that has really slowly hit much of rural areas in Norfolk. And I think it is worth just remembering that, you know, those banks, of course everyone understands you can't have a hugely staffed branch bank in every village. But there is a contract at the heart of the state between citizens, government, and operations like banks that work under regulations. And banks are there to provide a service as well. And if they're not going to provide that service, then I think we do need to look at, well, who is going to provide it? And I hope, to the point that my right honourable... Yes, of course.
Grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that it's understandable that with the number of people who are going into banks to do their business these days, it's not unreasonable that there should be some sort of restructuring? But I think the idea of banking hubs where all the banks, all the main banks, club together to ensure there's a proper facility in a town or a substantial village is a very good idea. And don't you think it's important that they should take in cash and takings from the small businesses, because they don't all do that?
I do. My right honourable friend amplifies exactly the point I was making. He's right, and we need, in areas sparsely populated or rural areas, will require often different solutions. And in the same way that small rural schools require us to network and support them through multi-academy trusts, similarly, we need to be imaginative in thinking about how we support cash access and banking and saving in rural areas. And I think this touches on a sort of deep problem I've witnessed over many years, that Whitehall tends to see these problems through an urban lens. And we do need to just think a bit about how rural areas often need a slightly different approach. So I hope that this bill will also help, and the response to it, the cross-party support to it, will help encourage the Treasury to think about how we can do more and make this a moment to encourage greater choice and competition out in the market. It is particularly sad, I think, that the banks have stepped back from this during 2 or 3 decades in which we've seen many of these banks focus rather more on the big international complex financial trading, the derivatives, which of course led to quite a lot of the problems we had back in the Great Crash. And it's particularly sad in Norfolk, given this is where one of our great banks, Barclays, actually started. And the Gurney and the Barclay families, it started originally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the first bank had its roots at King's Lynn Docks, where, as people were required to pay duties, they required credit finance. And there's a very nice plaque. If any of you have not been, please, I'd encourage you to go to King's Lynn, a beautifully regenerated and refurbished Georgian dockyard, and you can see there the plaque to the first credit facility that became the great Barclays Bank. And it's particularly sad, I think, to see a bank like Barclays step back from the place in which it originally started. And everyone has history and roots and heritage, and I'm not such a romantic that I expect Barclays to put a bank in every single Norfolk village, but I do think there's a responsibility on all of these companies to just make sure that the people who in the end they're there to serve are actually getting the service that they need. I want to particularly highlight the importance of this cash access issue on high streets for small businesses. It's becoming a really serious problem, and I know the Minister understands it, and I'm grateful for his acknowledgement of it. And I know that across East Anglia, and I'm sure it's happening elsewhere, we're seeing increasing frequency of ATM raids, JCBs driving into banks and taking ATMs out, but that's the thin end of a bigger wedge. And many businesses in Dereham, in Attleborough, in Wymondham, in Watton, in Hingham, are really beginning to struggle with what to do with cash on a Monday morning, and many people locally struggling to find a bank they can actually access. I know there are many people who want to speak this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I won't detain you or the House for too long, but I did want to touch on this issue of mutuality, and my right honourable friend, the member for Hertfordshire North East, touched on it earlier, and I think it's something that we need to, in this House, talk about more, celebrate more, champion and promote more. And the truth is, this company, back when we were 300 years ago writing the rule book for modern capitalism, when we were defining the joint stock limited company, when we were setting out that legal framework in English constitutional law, in common law, that drove the Industrial Revolution, we created those limited liability companies that allowed people to invest, to raise money, to back projects. That was a key part of what this country did. I would suggest that in an age of globalised capitalism, high technology, we have a challenge as well to make sure that capital doesn't become so disconnected from the people who are providing the money, the savers, and the people who are needing the money to build businesses. For capitalism to work, you need a connection between money and the people who are saving it and the people who are borrowing it. And the last crash in the city was a very clear example of what happens when that disconnection is allowed to get to crisis proportions. When people don't know where their money that they've deposited is going, and when people who buy a complex derivative bond don't actually know what it's built on or what is actually underpinning it, you have a serious problem. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to an agrarian revolution of trading wheat for a lift on a cart into Dereham, but I do think there is a real issue in our economy of connected capitalism, and that we, particularly perhaps on this side of the House, as card-carrying advocates for the market, do need to continue to champion and make clear that markets work when they have values, when they have connection, when they have people at the heart of them. Markets that are completely disconnected, that have no sense of the requirements of the people putting the capital in or taking the capital out. Markets that don't value that connection. Regulators that don't understand the importance in the end of the bond of responsibility between people who are trading with each other. I would argue this is both a proud tradition at the heart of the old Labour movement, but it's also a proud tradition in civic conservatism. This is Burke's Little Platoons. And in a spirit of joint party philosophising on this Friday morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, perhaps I can put some wind in the sails of the movement for mutuality. And I think we could see, I'd love to see more mutuality in different sectors. Yes, in finance, in banking, in housing. Clearly the building societies have been a great reform. I would argue actually the housing associations have been a great conservative reform in housing. But there are many examples of mutuality that I think we could blow onto the embers of mutuality and encourage more in different areas. And particularly in some of our social care sectors, in some of our health provision, it shouldn't be a stark choice between private, profit, public, state. There's a whole third sector of mutuality, of membership organisations that can deliver public goods with cost reimbursement and important disciplines of financial control that aren't necessarily either public sector with all of the challenges that go with efficiency, or private sector with all the incentives for high profit. There's a whole raft of organisations out there that we could be deploying, I think, rather better in both health and care, but also in criminal justice, in a whole range of areas where the state has struggled in the last few decades to achieve its stated objectives. Yes, of course.
I think he's making an outstanding speech, and we could philosophise here all day, which I'm tempted to do very badly. But mutuality in the modern day requires a profit element. For the branches to remain open for the building societies, the business has to produce a profit. Mutuality in the sense of Ketley's Bank in 1775 is a different concept completely. And therefore we should always come back to the point that he's making. For mutuality to succeed, it is based upon a civic, conservative, capitalist model. It cannot work in any other way.
Yeah, my old friend makes an excellent point and encourages me to wrap up my philosophising. He's right. I'm not at all anti-profit. It's what you do with the profit. And I think one of the geniuses of mutuality is that the profit is recycled back in to pursue the interests of those who put the capital in the first place. I happily give way.
Well, I'm very grateful to him, and I mustn't keep trespassing because I've got a bill. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that if you look at pension funds and the possibilities of extending that sort of approach into social care. There's a lot in this idea of mutuality, and also the point about a profit. If those funds are invested in national goods, important national infrastructure, things of that sort, we can all benefit, but of course it has a financial aspect to it as well.
Well, my right honourable friend again makes the point even more eloquently than I was trying to do, Madam Deputy Speaker. He's right, and I think I make this point in all seriousness, that actually in so many of the areas, in infrastructure, as he says, I dream of a world in which people can put their own savings into mutual vehicles. I'd love people to be able to invest in the Cambridge-Norwich Railway Development Corporation, to fund the regeneration of those neglected stations, to create and fund investment vehicles. There's a whole wealth of instruments, vehicles, bodies that are rooted in that very fertile period of 18th and 19th century English capitalism. Scottish capitalism too, actually, to be fair. The Enlightenment in Edinburgh had a big part of this, and I think there is something we could do to draw on these models better in pursuit of many of our public sector objectives. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I wrap up, let me return to the more mundane and practical issues. This is a really important bill, I think, for both updating the law, for giving building societies a chance to get back to where they were back in the early 90s. They were responsible for something like 60% of the market. They've dropped down to 20%. So to help building societies compete and to get back and able to provide that core service, to help those who want to save in building societies, not banks, those who need those first-time buyers, those, particularly in my part of the world in Norfolk, who haven't got high salaries, are looking for a very safe, very reliable local building society that can help them acquire, hopefully, a local house built for them rather than for commuters who are moving into Norfolk. We need to think about the people who are actually driving public services and the rural economy. So for the first-time buyers, this is a really important measure. And as the Honourable Lady said in introducing the bill, increasing lending capacity is in itself a huge step forward. And I think the figure is 10 billion of extra lending capacity will benefit 20,000, will allow the provision of another 20,000 mortgages, and particularly for first-time buyers, that is hugely important. So can I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by genuinely congratulating and thanking the Honourable Lady for Sunderland Central in bringing this forward, the government in working with her and us on it, and all those who've helped. And I think this bill strikes a small but very important blow and sends a key signal that building societies are back, we want to support them, and we want to help that as part of a broader commitment to civic, small, local, platoon, connected capital that can help people in the communities up and down this country save and withdraw money in the way they need to support the local economies on which the national economy is built.